Let's get started. I'm Bob Norton, for those of you who haven't joined one of these before. In short, I'm a serial entrepreneur, but been consulting and advising companies for over 20 years now. The short version of my career is that I spent 8 years as a technologist building products and software. I was one of the founders of Thomson Reuters. It was called Thomson Financial Services back then. We're going back into the 1980s. I built and exited four companies for over $1 billion cumulative total, and those companies generate $12 billion in revenue today. And my claim to fame is growing two different companies to 100 million in sales within 5 years each. And so that's what sort of gave me the experience and the pedigree to create the CEO Boot Camp, which I did in 2004, and then AirTight Management, which was conceptualized in 2009 and sort of rolled out in 2010 and 11, and is my primary focus today. As a matter of fact, we're getting ready to scale AirTight Management next year and moving on. I've only been using the intellectual property myself for many years now as I've polished it and built it, but we'll be taking that and bringing in referral partners and salespeople and more implementers. I am very technical because I was a VP of engineering and CTO way back when, and I've worked in over 40 industries now. I've lost count, helped over 200 clients scale, written 6 books, and I don't want to go over this because a lot of you have seen this before. I have a lot of hobbies. I'm sort of a serial hobbyist. I'm a scuba diver, a pilot, a yacht I used to own. I don't own it anymore, that I used to race. And this workshop is about scaling. Now, we define scaling as growing at somewhere about 25% or more compound annual, and that's sort of a different animal. And everyone knows about 80% of startups fail, but they don't know that only 1 in 400 companies will ever reach $10 million, and about 1 in 6,300 companies will ever reach $100 million. So either I'm the luckiest guy in the world, or getting $200 million companies in a row means I figured out scaling. And I believe it's one of the rarest skills in the world, because people that do it generally go and retire on a beach or become consultants or board of directors or advisors, and they rarely teach it. So that's sort of our thing at Airtight Management, is not only teaching but rolling up our sleeves and doing scaling. So statistically, everyone knows 80% of startups fail, and I think it's more because we don't know about a lot of the failures. They don't even incorporate, so they can't be measured. But it's 1,260 times harder to reach $100 million. And that's because you've got to do 1,000 things right to scale a company to $100 million. I'm a little famous for saying that any company can become $1 billion company. And that is literally true, because a company is just a legal entity that you put products and services into. And so no matter what a company is doing today, it can potentially innovate and create products and services that can grow it at a much more rapid rate and to $1 billion or more. And I'll show you some of the numbers around this and what this means, because scaling and the mindset of scaling can be a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's one that Elon Musk does a lot, right? He's solving huge problems. Therefore, he can attract huge capital. Therefore, he can attract the best people. And that tends to be sort of a cycle that builds on itself. And so you've got to have that mindset and really shift gears. It's not the same as getting a startup going and getting to your first traction. So as I said, we consider scaling to be 25% plus growth. At 10% today might not even barely keep up with inflation, because we see 6, 8, 10% inflation. But if you're growing at 50 to 25 to 50% or more, you have to have a different culture and mindset, because essentially you're always trying to replace yourself no matter what job you do, and your managers are always trying to grow their people up, because that growth requires headcount growth, and you need to promote a lot of people. So we're going to talk about that and how to execute the reorganizations that are ultimately necessary. So a company scaling at 50 to 100% is going to be worth hundreds of times, literally more than a company that's going to scale at 5 or 10 or 15%. So that should be the goal of most companies, unless you want, a lifestyle business. This slide is in all the workshops because it's so fundamental. And I'm amazed no one else has done this kind of slide before. I think it's unique. I've never seen anything like it, but I created this for the CEO boot camp many years ago. In 2004, I did the first CEO boot camp. And it shows that your businesses, are either commodity businesses on the scale of differentiation, or they're breakthrough businesses. And along that spectrum, you have to be in that top right quadrant with both differentiation and protectability to have a scalable company. So a commodity business is not scalable. The reason is that it can't attract capital, and that capital won't have enough ROI or return on investment to pay back at the rates that investors want. And so it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy of failure if you're doing what everyone else is doing. And that's not to say that, it's not honorable to have, a regular service business that's, making pizzas or doing dry cleaning or whatever. But those aren't the kinds of businesses we're talking about. We're talking about the businesses that are venture capital worthy and can and want to reach, 50 million, 25 million, or $100 million or more in sales. Once you become competitive, you can grow more rapidly because then you can potentially tap some types of financing, maybe not institutional venture capital, because they're going to want some higher protectability and some more differentiation. And once you become totally distinct in the market, you're unique, at least in some niche. It doesn't mean you have to be unique at everything you do in the world. You could even be unique in terms of your geographical monopoly, but that's not very protectable because anyone can move into those geographic markets, right? But a truly scalable company is a breakthrough company. And of course, we all think of Google and Facebook and Uber and all those big ones, but those are hyper growth companies. I'm not even talking about those. I'm talking about the middle of the bell curve in terms of companies that can grow and scale and have the ability to attract capital and go public. And so to be a scalable company, you really need to be under this oval here that is shown, because that's where all the money is, and it's what's going to attract the investment capital, and it's going to attract the best people because they can make more money in stock options. And the smartest people want to go to the more rapid growth companies because it's better for their career and it's better for their pocketbook, right? And so the numbers of this look like this. And when you look at this, you'll see what's shown on the left here is if you start with a $2 million company, which is generally where we like to come in and start to drop in all the systems needed to scale and discipline a business. If you're growing at 10%, you're only going to be 8 years later, you're only going to be about twice as big, compounding that 10% over 8 years. If you grow at 100%, your business is going to be $32 million starting at 2. So it's 32 times bigger. It's 64 million in sales, right? And so here is the revenue, and this is the factor. And so your company will be, if you grow for 5 years at 100%, it's going to be 32 times bigger. Now that can give almost any investor what they need. And so all investors really want to be in this bottom right area here, because that's going to provide the kind of return that's necessary for venture capital and other risk-based investment, where a lot of their investments aren't going to work out, and they really need the ability to have some grand slams or some home runs in that list. So every investor and smart employees as well want to be in this oval. And this is a decision. This isn't something that happens to you. This is a function of you setting up a strategic plan and making sure you have enough differentiation through innovation and enough protectability so that 5 years after you've launched your business, you don't have 100 competitors that do the exact same things, because you've got trade secrets, you've got copyrights, you've got proprietary information and proprietary processes. Maybe you've got some patents. There are 17 different ways to add barriers to entry to business that we teach at the CEO Bootcamp. And everyone knows about IP. That's just one of them. And it's a very common one. And everyone should have some IP. SOP, at a minimum, copywriting and protecting your internal training manuals and sales processes and marketing processes. But so that's the generic stuff about what does it take to have a scalable companies. And we generally only work with companies that want to grow at that 50% plus, because as I said, that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So today's agenda, talking about reorganization of a business, we're going to cover what's the definition of a reorg. There are many, and Wall Street has one definition. I'm talking about it in the context of a rapidly growing company, which needs to reorganize typically at least every year, and sometimes, every 6 months if it's growing very rapidly. What are the indications that mean you need to reorganize? You don't want people bleeding on the floor with stress and burnout and all kinds of nasty things happen before you reorganize. So you've got to predict and be ahead of the curve there. What are the key factors and the time frame that need to be handled in the execution? What does the new org chart look like? We'll talk about that. What are the steps that are necessary to do a reorganization without preventing any panic? Because people get really worried about this stuff. And so you've got to be confidential until it's ready to execute as best you can. And we're going to talk about how you actually execute the day of the reorg. What does that look like? And then after execution day, how do you support all the people in those new roles? Let's get into it. So what is a reorg? We define a reorg as a major shift in the organization where people are typically promoted, which might be actual or effectively demoting some people, right? Because you're going to have someone that's unhappy. For everyone that's promoted, you're probably going to have 2 or 3 people that thought they should be promoted and didn't get in that particular wave. And you're going to have to bring in new hires. Obviously, a growing company is adding to its headcount. It's got to bring in more and better experience. And so in any situation, you're going to have new hires coming in. And you need to protect the culture and make sure the people that are there aren't upset by the new people as well, because some of those are going to be hired above the people that have been there for a long time. So these are the political sensitivities and why you need to think a lot about the process of reorganizing. So that's our definition. Wall Street has this alternative definition here because most of its reorgs are about recapitalizations or mergers or getting ready for an IPO with a mezzanine financing and squeezing some old investors down so new investors can come in. I mean, there's loads of scenarios. And we're not talking about that. We're talking about the normal repeating process of a reorganization that's necessary as a company grows. Because typically, if it's going to grow 10, 15, 20%, you're going to have to do some shuffling around. And if it's going to grow 50%, you probably have a major reorganization that needs to be done. So there's a pain measurement scale here that needs to be looked at. And the more forethought and planning you have, the less pain you're going to have to get to see that you're ready to reorg. So here are some of the key indicators that should be noticed early. If the team is stressed or people are burning out or you have a high turnover rate, if they're not making deadlines and there's internal arguments and friction, that's a time to look at the organizational structure and to know something's wrong. Reorganization may not be the only solution. It might be, people problems or other things happening, but it's a strong indicator that some reorganization is appropriate. Entering new ground in terms of scale. Anytime if a department goes from 5 people to 10 people, it's likely that the manager head of that department didn't do that before. They didn't manage 10 people before. And so they need some coaching. They need some ability to get support. They need some time. And they probably need some assistance from the CEO and more senior people because they have to systematize more. They're always pushing responsibilities down and trying to train, promote, and up-level people to do bigger responsibilities, and or more work with more leverage. So you got to ask yourself, do you have someone on board that did that challenge before? Let's say that's a marketing department and, you're going from, running 5 campaigns a month to running 20 campaigns a month, right? That's a whole different animal. And the person in charge of that is doing completely different things. And we'll talk about that in our skill set matrix tool which is an analytical tool to put some math and some objectivity around hiring and screening people and designing organizational charts. But if you have someone who has never built a team of 7 people and you're in a reorg putting them in charge of 7 people, you're probably taking a big risk. And that doesn't mean you should never do it, but it does mean you've got to think a lot about supporting that person and managing that risk closely. They're probably going to need more support from their superior or the CEO, more training and other things to be able to handle those new responsibilities, because very few people can grow their career as fast as a company can grow. And we'll talk about the math of that as well. Metrics in the department are trending down. Any department over 5 people or at least 7 people should have KPIs or a dashboard. Dashboards make managers much better managers. They'll take a manager that's a 5 and make them a 7, or they'll take a manager that's a 9 and make them a 10 by having total accountability and measurability and black and white results if you're tracking the right metrics that are tied in to the strategy appropriately of the business. If the CEO can't coach a department head enough for them to keep up with the growth of the company, because the CEO only has so much time, and in theory, they're the most experienced person in the business, at least on a broad basis as a generalist, to help with management and leadership and systems and act as a sounding board. Obviously you want a collaborative management style, and you don't want a dictatorial CEO, but a good CEO, a level 5 leader, is putting aside their ego and they're helping everyone to grow, and they're developing their people on a long-term basis. One of the things we'll talk about is a good CEO not only has the next reorg in their head, they have what the organizational chart will look like 5 years out. They have what in their head as a vision, what the organizational chart will look like in the second reorg after the one you're doing, because they're always hiring with that in mind, and they're always developing people with that in mind. But there is a point where, you've got to bring in more outside help and experience, because the CEO will not have enough time to grow everybody in the team. And of course, lower level, C-level people and managers below them need to be coaching people up too. It is not optional to have a learning and development program and coaching going on. You will not scale if you don't invest in these things, because you'll create a vacuum and you'll burn out people and you'll have high turnover, and all kinds of things will be going on that will hurt your ability to grow and will make you grow up and down and sideways instead of growing smoothly as we'd like to do. I think most people would rather grow smoothly at 30% than do fits and starts at 50%, right? There's going to be less stress for people, more predictability. And so I'm not saying everyone, should or must grow at 50 or 100%. 30% is very good and can generate the kind of returns that investors need. It's just, sort of the minimum if you're going to dominate a market and scale rapidly. Departments have grown 50%. If you added 50% headcount, there's a good chance that the head of that department has not managed those people before, because you hired them in a startup mode, and now they're managing 5 times as many people. When you hired them, they were managing 2 people, and now they potentially got 10 people under them. That's a different job, and it's a different focus, and they need mentoring and they need coaching to grow their people skills, to grow their management and leadership skills, because every good manager and leader is trying to grow managers and leaders under them, because that's what you have to do in a company that's going to scale. I skipped over the span of control is technically the definition of how many people report to you. And sometimes it will include in that count the outside relationships that you need to manage if you've got a vendor that you've got to work with. But typically, span of control of 7 is sort of considered the max. And when you go beyond that, you're probably not going to have enough time for other things that need to be done. So when you do an org chart, you typically want no more than 7 direct reports anywhere in that org chart. There are exceptions if people are managed on commissions and remote and virtual, and they're more of a contractor. But with full-time equivalent employees, 7 is probably the maximum you should have for direct reports. So what are the key factors in the time frame for a reorganization? Well, I believe very strongly that the reorganization and its planning should be kept highly confidential. It will be a massive zap or tap on productivity, and it will generate bad politics. The rumors, the discussions, the jockeying, the political stuff that starts to happen will all distract from the company's real mission and its value creation, because everyone will be thinking about what's in it for me when the reorg comes up. Do I get a new office? Do I get a new promotion? I hope that person I don't like, doesn't get promoted, et cetera, et cetera. So this should be among the key 2 or 3 people that are doing the plan, so that you have collaborative thinking, multiple heads and experience looking at it. But it shouldn't be released what that reorganization is going to be, or even the fact that it's happening. It's best to keep quiet. Instant notice reorgs are executed in a single day, ideally. And I don't care if you're a multi-country business with 100 offices, or if you're a 10-employee company. It's always best to get as close as you can to announcing it to everyone at the same time. And you may have to do that obviously in multiple time zones and multiple media, but we'll talk about the ideal format, which is sufficient for most companies. And of course, with today's technology, it's very easy to record it and send it out, and people can, see it when they get up the next morning if they're in the later time zone, et cetera. So ideally, they should know that something is coming, but that's about it. And 7 to 30 days in advance, I would have a confidentiality cap, and only the reorg team would be working for that week to month to figure out what the reorg is and validate that it's going to work, because you've got to verify that people will want to be promoted. You've got to make sure they're committed. You're not going to lose them. You have to give them a raise. There are things you should discuss with people that are going to get promotions to make sure they're locked in, because the last thing you want to do is promote someone to a new department and not have, to run a new department and not have them committed long term and have them leave in the short term. That would be sort of a disaster for the business, right? So the major promotions that are happening, you want some discussions with them, but you've got to keep it confidential. Planning reorgs should look at a 6 to 12 month, depending on your growth rate. If you're growing at 100%, per year, you probably need to think about reorgs every 6 months. If you're growing at 50% per year, 12 months is probably the right cadence or frequency to look at a reorganization of the whole org chart and shuffle people around a little. The CEO should have the next 2 reorgs in mind, as I said. And ideally, if you have a strategic plan 5 years out, the budget and the staffing that's built into that simulator, not a pro forma that just comes from an accountant, but a real business plan simulator, that's going to have the headcounts of every department. And so that's obviously going to be the math that drives what the org chart looks like, and thinking about how many direct reports, and getting ahead of the curve, because the bigger a company gets, the longer in advance you have to plan these changes to execute them, because it's like the oil tanker metaphor, right? It can take several miles to turn or slow down an oil tanker, because it's got so much momentum. And a bigger company with over 100 or 200 people may have the same issues, or will have the same issues to some degree. The learning and development program we talked about, it's not optional. Ideally, that's why the CEO has the next org chart beyond the one you're reorganizing for today in mind, because they're setting up the training and the learning and development of the key players that are going to continue to step up. And as I said, not everyone can keep up with the growth of a company that's growing very rapidly. So maybe they're only going to get promoted every other time But when you have to bring in someone above them, that can be sold as a plus for them too, because they're now going to have more attention. They're going to have mentorship. They're not going to have as much stress, and everyone needs to take a breather. You can't go in a startup from 0 to 100 million nonstop, 80 hours a week without having some impact on your personal life and your mental health and other things. For everyone that gets promoted, there's 2 or 3 people that didn't get promoted that thought they deserved it. And so you've got to think about how you're going to handle those people. And you want to celebrate and make visible the reasons why the ones that did get promoted or got promoted rather, so that they understand that. So you've got to think about those people that may leave because they've been jilted in their own mind, even though they probably didn't have the skill set and they certainly didn't compete with the person you selected for whatever reasons. But it is appropriate to have a session with them and make sure, one-on-one after the execution of the reorganization, what they have to do. We have a document and a structure in part of our systems that's called the employee development ladder. And it has a list of the 10 criteria or 10 things you have to do at each level of management, going from individual contributor up to the C level. And so there's 40 or 50, or maybe it's even 60 different things in that list that someone who really is serious about developing their career needs to think about learning to do. And that provides total transparency and framework, which reinforces integrity, that you're getting promoted because you're doing a great job and you have merit, not because you play squash with the CEO or you're married to the boss's sister, or whatever it is. That's having politics creep in can cause a lot of grief in a culture. So what does the new org chart look like? Well, this is clearly art, and I can't sit with you here and give you rules for creating the next org chart. That comes from experience and experiential learning. It's an art, it's not a skill. But we do have this tool we call the skill set matrix, which shows generically the 5 standard business disciplines that people grow up in their career. Product development, can be software development, or it can be engineering or designing bridges or whatever. Marketing is obvious. Finance is obvious. Sales is a little less obvious because it varies a lot from company to company, B2B or B2C or B2B2C. Whatever your company does is what should be filled in there. And then operations, is kind of where most of the rubber hits the road in delivering the product. And there's 4 levels. And of course, this is a spectrum. It's not magically one day you move into the next level. It's a spectrum of growth. But what we'll talk about what's required to move, really in this thing from right to left, and move up the skill set matrix. But strategic planning drives the org chart. When you know the staffing that's required at a certain revenue level to deliver a certain amount of your product or service, that ought to be in a simulator, in a spreadsheet that calculates all that and has all the right ratios, which are in your dashboard. The ratio of customer service people to customers is something you need to know, and it's something you need to watch. So that's a critical KPI for a customer service department or an operations department, right? So a lot of this is coming from the strategic plan and the risks. Who can you promote from within? It's always better, and I think, and this is just an off-the-cuff intuitive guess, but I think you ought to try to at least promote 50%, and 70% would be better, of people internally, and the new people coming in are 30%. And so if you can grow internally 50 to 70% of your people, you're going to have less brain drain. You're going to have less people upset. You're going to set an example that more people are going to understand, hey, if I work hard here, I'm going to have opportunity to get promoted. They're not just always going to go out and hire someone over me with, more experience than me, right? So people want to see that opportunity. So promoting from within is a big deal, and it ought to be part of your culture and talked about. Obviously, posting jobs internally and having discussions, both good and bad, with people that may or may not qualify for those new roles. And this skill set matrix is sort of one way to show that to them very objectively. I would say that both of these things, what's that org chart look like? needs to be known by the CEO at least, and ideally the whole C-level team, 3 to 6 months in advance. We believe that for a company to scale, it needs three key people: the visionary, the operator, and the sales/marketing person, depending on what your business is. It might be, online sales, which is more about marketing because the sale is done on the page, on the website page, right? Versus B2B sales, which is obviously a whole different animal on the opposite end of the spectrum, where you might be selling six-figure products with a Miller Heiman or other solution selling or Vito type selling sales process. There's many models, and most companies should integrate and design a custom sales process. What else is needed in the web chart? Well, this is a very complex issue. It's got to be thought about. You should build the org chart. You should live with it for a while. It's gut feel driven because it's art, not science. It's gestalt, as the psychologists would say, because there are so many factors that would be weighted differently by different people: personality versus skill set versus commitment versus what you'll have to pay them. All of those things are going to have to come in, and that's just the top few in deciding who's going to get promoted to run a new department or run a new division of the business as it grows. And you've got to be thinking of, how committed are they to their own growth and their own personal development and their career, because only those people are going to be able to be promoted in, let's say the majority or half of the promotions that are going to happen during a reorg. If you're reorging every 6 months, obviously you can't promote that person most of the time, every single time, because they're going to rapidly outgrow their skill set. And then you get the Peter principle, right, where people get promoted to the level of their incompetence. And because they were a great software engineer, you decide to make them a software engineering manager, which is the worst thing you ever did, because they don't have the people skills that's required for a manager, even though they were a great software engineer. So that person might become a software architect very well, but they may not want to or be capable of being a people person and a manager. This is a very valuable tool. We have a whole course on how to use this because there's 3 different ways to look at it. And as I mentioned earlier, this is actually 3-dimensional. This level is based on the stage of development you're at. And something that people ignore that's very important is, what stage company did they acquire a skill set at? The extreme example of that is obviously the VP of marketing at IBM is not anywhere near the same skill set as the VP of marketing at a startup or an early stage startup, right? And there's a spectrum where they're becoming more manager, more planning, more strategy, and less execution, and they're getting away from the details as they go up that curve, right? So you've got to think about that. So this 20 cells here is actually 100 cells in our 5-stage development model of companies growing. And as you shift gears, you've really got to think about what that person has done in that size company, because most people can only stretch 1 or at most 2 stages of development. Because if you've got all your experience in a startup, you're not going to do as well, at least initially, in a big company environment that's very bureaucratic. Who's investing in developing themselves? I think this is one of the most important things. It's about mentality, it's about commitment, it's about self-actualization, someone's willingness to invest in themselves to grow. And I'm a nut about this. I've been doing personal development since my father introduced it to me when I was 13 or something like that. And, I went to the Tony Robbins fire walks and, did all of that stuff, which is good for your mindset. But it's really something you've got to apply to every area of business. And to be a CEO, you have to be able to manage and know sales, marketing, finance, product development, and operations, all of these things well, in addition to legal issues, HR issues, hiring. And of course, a lot of that, you can't be an expert at everything, and you've got to have complementary people on the team. So a little bit more about this. I blew this up just so people can get a screenshot. Of course, we're going to make the recording available to everyone that's registered for this call. This has been a partial sample of our scaling and growth workshop for CEOs and senior teams. You can access the full set of 12 growth and scaling workshops for $349 at entrepreneurshipu.com. These are being given live every Wednesday, first Wednesday of every month, and will continue through 2024. Consultants, management consultants in our methodologies, and they'll be able to use, all of our IP and training and everything like that. So you might want to take a quick look at a partner page. We're not actively recruiting right now because we're systematizing our sales and marketing processes for the next 3 to 6 months. But, later in 2024, we'll be looking to hire more implementers and building a referral network, where people can make $10,000 referral fee potentially on bringing us a client that we install the whole AirTight management systems in.
I definitely like to look into that, and because I'm looking at ramping up my consulting practice back up again. Past 4 years I'm involved with transforming a company, and now I'm looking to get back into consulting work. And a lot of things you're doing right now caught my attention. I'd like to talk further with you on this, definitely.
Yeah, no, happy. You'll find a Calendly link on our website on just about every page. And, I'm always happy to meet for a Zoom coffee with people who are CEOs and running businesses. And, even if nothing comes out of it, networking and taking a break to hear from different people is always enjoyable. It keeps you grounded and know what's going on out there,
Yes, perfect. Look forward to it. Thank you. I'll connect with you.
Okay, great. Well, I'm going to wrap it up then. We're about done, and if we don't have anyone that wants to work on a problem with their business or ask any more questions, I'll say goodnight. For those of you who don't know, AirTight management, this is the diagram of the 6 major systems that make up the whole framework of AirTight management. It's completely unique, supported by 500 training videos. And it's the world's most comprehensive leadership operating system, or growth operating system, if you prefer, for small companies in the $1 million to $30 million area, to cut 8 to 10 years potentially off the learning curve of a company that's ready to scale. We generally only work with companies that already have $1 million in sales and a product market fit. And we come in over a year, we'll implement all these systems, train the management team in best practices, and help them get to a 50% growth rate. And recently we introduced our Platinum program, which guarantees to add $10 million to a company's valuation, as well as, depending on the circumstances, you have to qualify, obviously, but get them to 50 to 100% growth in their second year, after we've installed all the systems and they're cranking with all those things happening. So that's it today. I'm going to hang around and take questions for anyone. Here is the schedule. If you haven't seen it, you can take a screenshot of that, throw it in your calendar. Outlook, you can say the first Wednesday of every month. And we'll be doing these through August of next year. This is number 4. And all of these will go into our learning management system, so that if you have access to that, you can have access, for years and teach your team all this stuff.